Awesome. Okay, it's currently 10 a.m. Both of my roommates are asleep, and there's somewhere I have to be in like an hour and a half. So we're gonna do our best to get through this. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Ilea, and today I want to talk about Wizards of Waverly Place, and why I think it's the most influential show to come out of 2007. Obviously, saying Wizards of Waverly Place is the most influential show of 2007 is a massive claim that is very subjective to the individual viewer. I have my biases for this show because of the nostalgia I have attached to it, but as I was doing research into what made the show such a hit, I very quickly realized that Wizards of Waverly Place, my goodness, had come with more than just the idea of, like, teenage wizards. But we definitely need to, like, backtrack for a second, because Wizards of Waverly Place was airing during, like, the peak of my childhood, but that's not the same for everybody else. So basically, if you don't know, Wizards of Waverly Place was initially released on October 12th in 2007, and it was about a family of 5 who lived in New York City, and they ran a sandwich shop together. The father, his name is Jerry Russo. He was once a very powerful wizard in the world, but he gave up all of his magic to marry his wife, because for some reason in this world, if you're a wizard who wants to marry a non-wizard, you can't have magical powers, which, like, there's something to be said about that, but we're not getting into that part. No, it's fine. Anyways, but basically, him and his wife, whose name is Teresa, they had 3 kids: Alex, who is portrayed by Selena Gomez, Justin and Max, and they all end up inheriting the magical powers that their dad once had. And the new show follows the typical format of, like, oh, the kids have, like, a magical lesson and they learn a new spell, and then they, usually Alex, but sometimes other ones, they get into trouble either by, like, misusing the spell or, I don't know, more generic means, and then it will end with them helping each other to get out of their trouble by, again, using, like, the magic spell that they learned or some other more human capabilities. It's a fairly standard formula for, like, a children's show, but my God, did it work, because I was obsessed with this show, and, like, even now looking through it at, like, a critical lens, I feel like it holds up really, really well, in the sense that, like, you know, you go back and you sit down and rewatch it and you can still enjoy it. It's not something that, like, feels inherently based for children, even though it is a children's show. The show itself has a lot of inaccuracies. The fact that this family is able to survive living on the Lower West Side of Manhattan despite running a fairly slow subway shop, that's for one, but again, we're not getting into that. But those inaccuracies add to the whimsicality of it all. I feel like in every show you watch, like, they live in this beautiful apartment, and you're like, you work an office job, like, maybe 15 hours a week. How are you affording this? But it adds to the whimsicality and to, like, the joy of watching it. My reasoning behind its success is less based on the inaccuracies, like, of the show, and more so based on what the show actually does correctly. I think one of the big reasons for its marketability for both adults and kids is that in 2008, for example, Wizards of Waverly Place had the most views among children for any scripted show, like, during the year, which is amazing and impressive for, like, a kids show. It had 3.44 million views among kids ages 6 to 19. And the thing is that that's not the total number of views the show got, because on average, after, like, looking up the episodes, Wizards of Waverly Place, like, any individual episode would roughly get around 4.14 million views, give or take, you know, depending on the episode. But what that means is that at least 700,000 people fell outside of, like, the target demographic for this show. And there has to be a reason for that, right? Because, like, I went back and I rewatched it for this peak. And I remember I rewatched it a couple of years ago too, and I still really enjoyed it. And, you know, watching it, you have to go, why? Why can I, as a 20-year-old woman, sit down, watch the show, and still find enjoyment in it? I think one of the big things to know is that we were in a golden age of television when this series came out. And the dates for the golden age of television are subject to change because it's very like subjective, I feel like, and also a lot of the dates vary, but for roughly what I could find, most people agree that from the years of 2000 to 2023, we're in a golden age of television, which basically means that, like, with the digitization of media, it means that production costs for TV shows fell, and so you were able to make a lot more shows and have a lot more, like, creative input and do a lot more with them and be able to put more effort into these stories to make people care about these characters. And I'm not saying that, like, Wizards of Waverly Place had a massive budget, but certainly in this era, it allows them to kind of do things they maybe couldn't have done before. For example, because they're wizards and they use magic, you'll need special effects for, like, their wands, and there are, you know, certain episodes, like, for example, the angel episodes where they, like, fly, or, like, even the last couple of episodes with, like, the family wizard competition when they're, you know, on, like, a magic carpet and they have to go to, like, save Harper from, like, the hippogriff? Griffin? I forget which one. It's one of those. The one with, like, the eagle head, the lion body. Yeah? Yeah. And, again, these effects aren't, like, grand, but it does take a lot more money and effort to be able to, like, produce them. And so in an age where production costs of TV shows can fall, you're able to do a lot more with, like, these fantastical aspects of the show. Which kind of does bring me to my second point of this show is fantasy, which is based heavily on imagination, something that children obviously have a lot of, so when they watch the show, they're going to, like, fall in love and be very excited about it. But a lot of adults yearn to experience, like, the child fantasy-like mindset again. I know that as a grown adult, my favorite shows all have something to do with fantasy, and obviously not all of my favorite fantasy shows are, like, for kids. Like, I love The Witcher, but I would never let my 5-year-old siblings watch The Witcher, you know? Like, it's just that when you're prompted with this show that is family-friendly, but then also includes that fun, like, fantastical aspect, it keeps your brain engaged. It keeps you wanting to watch it, like, for longer. The other thing that comes along with fantasy is very often, especially in our world, where it is kind of bleak to be a human right now, but fantasy kind of acts as a way of escapism, and it helps us sort of make sense of the world without having to use a ton of reason to, like, back up our thoughts. Which, like, is kind of nice, I feel like, because when I'm watching a show, I don't want to have to think about the modern aspects of the world. That is why a lot of the shows I watch are fantasy, because you don't have to think so much about it. But, like, not only does it help you kind of make sense of the world, it allows us to reassess our values as both people and the world we live in a way that holds kind of no real or true consequences, which maybe that doesn't matter so much for watching television. I think it does, but more so, like, the games you play, you can make questionable choices and you don't have to worry about the consequences because it's not real. That's not saying you should go make awful choices when you're playing, you know, fantasy video games, but that is to say that it helps make decisions that you probably wouldn't make in real life. Like, it makes them easier. In the same sense for television shows, it's not necessarily that you're making decisions when watching the show, but for example, when I'm watching a fantasy TV show, I find very often that I like the villains of the shows, you know? And it's not that I like villains in real life, but when I'm in a fantasy world, I don't have to worry about, like, the morality of deciding I like, I don't know, like, the Darkling over, like, Alina. I don't know if you watch Shadow and Bone. I feel like if you're here watching a Wizards of Waverly Place video, you probably do watch Shadow and Bone. Anyways, but again, these aspects are more so stuff that I feel like adults focus on, because children really only care about the imaginative parts. Maybe, actually, if you're watching a good TV show, kids are smart, so maybe they do pick up on, like, the morality of it all. But I know adults definitely do. And so in a fantasy show, when this exists, like, especially if we're thinking, for example, let's go back to the Angels arc, right? Rosie, spoilers, by the way, for the Angel arc in Wizards of Waverly Place, I'm so sorry, but this is relevant, I promise. But Rosie, for example, Rosie is originally presented as an angel, and then you later find out she's not an angel. Well, she is, but she's a dark angel, right? And this isn't me, but I'm sure there are people out there who really like Rosie. But Rosie's a villain of the arc. but they don't have to really worry about the fact that Rose is a villain of the arc because it's fantasy. It's not real. It's not like angels, exist, at least in our perception. And so to side with this villain in this magic world, it's not really affecting you. But it also makes it more fun and interesting to watch because you get to line your thoughts and ideals with stuff that, like, you never would have initially. Outside of it being, like, a fantasy show, which was, like, my number one thing, we'll also get into why it being fantasy is important, because you may also be like, oh, there are a lot of fantasy children's TV shows, which, like, yes, now. Outside of the fantasy aspect, it also features a family of color, which in 2007 was a big deal. If you look at, and I'll have show, like, some of the shows that were released in 2007. If we look at the shows that were released in 2007, they're all predominantly white-centric, which for 2007 isn't, like, crazy. That makes sense. But the other thing is that Wizards of Waverly Place is, like, one of the only shows that is based in fantasy. Most of these other shows are based in reality of some sort. And obviously, like, there's a limited number of kids shows that were released in 2007, but even looking at the kids shows, like, Phineas and Ferb was released in 2007. I love Phineas and Ferb. Fantastic show, by the way. Peak. Like, if even Phineas and Ferb, for as crazy as it gets, it's still based in some sort of form of reality. It's these kids on summer break finding ways to entertain themselves over the summer, which what they do to entertain themselves a normal child wouldn't be able to do, but it's still feasible to sit down and understand and go, okay, these cartoon kids are making the best of their summer, I can too. I can't watch Wizards of Waverly Place and watch Alex enter her magic storybook and go, oh yeah, let me go enter my magic storybook and bippity boppity boo my way through, like, my fantasy world. I watch Wizards of Waverly Place because of the fantasy aspect, because of the fact that I can't do a lot of the same things that these wizards can. And even outside of that, again, going back to the family of color, especially in a fantasy show where prior, a lot of the times the heroes of fantasy shows are white-centric, and if you're a person of color in this fantasy show, you're kind of painted as either a side character or, like, a villain. And this kind of creates this thing called the imagination gap. And what the imagination gap is the fact that, people of color are hardly represented in mystical tales, and if they are, it's oftentimes as the enemy. And what this means is that non-POC tend to have more, like, active and better imaginations and ambitions due to the fact that, like, when they're watching these shows, they are so often represented in, like, this light of they can do anything, whereas POC are not. And so having the main family of this children's fantasy show be Latina or Latin, that kind of helps start to bridge the gap. Obviously, this one show doesn't fix it. That's impossible. This one show can't fix it, but it can help in, making it easier for kids who are younger. Even on top of that, you might be like, oh, why does this matter? Which I'm actually hoping you're not asking that question, because if you're wondering why it matters to have diversity in fantasy TV shows, you can leave. Like, I'm sorry. But if for some reason you are wondering that, hypothetical rhetorical question. When we're looking at demographics of people who enjoy fantasy media, we find that, like, a majority of them are from marginalized groups, which I feel like makes sense, but the reason it makes sense in my head is kind of rough. I feel like marginalized groups definitely enjoy fantasy media probably more than the average, like, cis heteronormative white person does, because they are so used to being treated poorly that when they watch a fantasy show, it allows them to kind of escape the modern world they are in. Because that's part of the reason I watch fantasy, right? Is that, like, when my life sucks or when I don't really want to think about the world that I live in, I can go watch a fantasy show or play a fantasy game or interact with fantasy media in a way that kind of allows me to forget about it for a little bit, which is really rough, but I feel like at the same time, it's even more reason that fantasy needs to be inclusive and allow for these groups of people to fully see themselves in it and enjoy themselves. Even on top of that, because this is a children's show, young kids are very impressionable. Like, so so impressionable. And so a positive representation of their culture or their people in a TV show that they watch, you know, daily or weekly is very important to their mental development, especially in a genre that is typically catered towards white people. It greatly impacts how they view themselves when they get older. If they grow up never seeing themselves as the main hero or heroine in like a fantasy TV show, then that imagination gap is going to come back into play, and they're not going to believe they can, I don't know, go after whatever it is they want in life. Young kids are very impressionable, and when they're at the ages that they are watching Wizards of Waverly Place, typically, they will be in the Piaget stage of development, which is kind of a psychological theory that relates to the fact that in this stage, that's when their brains are most malleable, and so it is very important to give them good positive influences and views of like themselves, so that way when they grow up with those good positive influences and views of themselves. And obviously I said that this show is influential amongst everybody, and adults are not in this development stage if they're watching it, but that doesn't mean that this show can't have an impact on them. Your self-esteem is impressionable at all ages of life, and so being able to sit down and watch this TV show that represents like you or your people, especially since Hollywood has a habit of like whitewashing stories. So getting to see this family that is not white be in a pretty popular genre at the time, and they get to do cool and fantastical things, and they're like the main characters of the story, that definitely influences your self-perception when you're watching it, even if you are an adult. And I think that's like really important to consider. I think that these are all very subconscious reasons that people enjoy this show. I don't think anybody sits down and goes, oh yeah, this is gonna like greatly influence my child's, you know, mindset or perception of themselves growing up. I don't think that's the thought process, but I do think very subconsciously you see this show and you go, hey, it's not like the other children's shows of this time. I would watch it because it interests me. And if my kid likes it too, that's great. Obviously, the show isn't perfect. I don't think there is a single TV show out there that is perfect. And especially considering that this show was not produced by a Latin man, I think it is a very Americanized take on like what a Latin family looks like living in New York. But at the same time, with such a lack of representation, especially when this show was released, I'm willing to forgive that because it depicts this family in a good light, in a positive light, without throwing away their culture entirely. This is a little side tangent. This has nothing really to do with the main plot point of what I'm trying to make here, but like Alex Russo, that's the main character. That's the character Selena Gomez plays. Alex Russo has a best friend named Harper. Harper's like the only white person in this show. Actually, Jerry's white. Jerry's Italian, but that's not the point. Harper is like the main like white person of the show, which is so interesting because I feel like so often it's like the white main characters and then they're like POC best friend or POC side character. So to have the like best friend side character be white is like such a fun role reversal that like you never see in TV shows, and I really greatly enjoyed. This is also kind of really, really random, but I think another one of the reasons I like it is because all of the random antics that they do get into. There's an entire episode where their uncle turns into Shakira. Why? I don't know. And it's actually Shakira. She's like on the show. It's absolutely insane, and I'm obsessed with it. It's things like that. It's the physicality of the humor, but also like the randomness of it that absolutely makes young kids like it. And then when you're older and you go back and watch it, you're like, what is happening? This is so ridiculous, but also it's so entertaining. And like the script is written well. The characters get good character arcs. They're like, they have different personalities. Like it's really fun to sit down and watch and enjoy. And on top of that, you're, you know, getting a non-standard TV show to what like Disney would typically produce. Disney does a lot of things wrong. Like a lot of things wrong. Wizards of Waverly Place is not one of them. Fantasy as a genre needs to include POC as heroes and main characters as a way to teach young kids that even if their skin isn't as white as snow, they can still be special and deserve a place in the spotlight. I have so many fond memories from this show, obviously. This is like my favorite show from when I was a kid. It is absolutely like one of the best things to come out of Disney, and I think especially for the time, it has made its mark in like history as such. I'm so glad I had it as a TV show as a child. I can only hope that the kids of today find a television show that is just as impactful, or maybe they'll go and find this. It's on Disney Plus. Maybe like in a couple of years when, you know, if I have kids and I set them down to watch it, I'll be like, you know what? Let's watch Wizards of Waverly Place. Let's see if it still holds up and if you enjoy it. Because I think it's important for kids to have a show that not just POC kids. I think it is important for all kids of all races, all ethnicities, everything, to have a show that depicts POC in this positive light. Because in a world where everything is centered around white people, it is important to show diversity in all aspects of the world. Even in children's fantasy TV show, even to kids who are not POC.